Welcome to The Blitz, a podcast from Coram Deo Church. The Blitz is all about tackling tough topics head-on at full speed. Are you ready? Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of the day it is that you happen to be checking out this podcast. My name is John, and I am your host once again today on The Blitz. How you guys doing? You guys doing well? It's been a crazy summer here in Washington. We've had fantastic weather here locally, and man, I am recovering from being sick for a couple weeks, and glad to be kind of getting back into a normal schedule. And part of that is getting these episodes, these podcasts out. So here we are this morning. Actually, for me, it's morning. I don't know what time it is for you. But for me, it's the morning time. And where we're going to go today is we're going to talk about Trent Reznor, Johnny Cash, and the Psalms. Now, before I dig into this, I need to confess, or maybe acknowledge, kind of own something up front here. My MO and the whole point of the Blitz was to go after controversial issues, to try and address them, because it is just it's really important, I think, to have a pastor's voice speaking into things that our culture is struggling with. We don't always have time to do that in a sermon, and it's not always appropriate to draw in issues that are outside the scope of a particular text on a Sunday. And so this kind of gives me a way to speak to things that are being debated, things that are happening in the broader church, things that are happening in our culture. And so up to this point, I've really focused on things that would be described as more controversial in nature. However, what I'm going to talk about in this episode is not necessarily something that is controversial, or at least I should say it should not be controversial. But I want to talk about Trent Reznor, Johnny Cash, and the Psalms, okay? So here we go. Every summer, our church takes a break from whatever book it is that we are studying through, and we focus on the Psalms. So we did this, I think it was 4 years ago, and we basically take the second half of June, all of July, all of August, and sometimes a week or two in September, and we just go psalm by psalm through all of the Psalms. And it's become I think a rich and fun tradition for us in our church. It kind of keeps things fresh. And also one of the things that's really unique about preaching the Psalms is that each one of the Psalms are a standalone. So unlike the Gospels or other books of the Bible, in which perhaps outside of wisdom literature, the chapters really build on one another as they're telling stories. You really need to know what happened in chapter 8 if you're going to understand what's happening in chapter 9. But the Psalms aren't like that. They're all standalone songs. And so what that does is people are in and out for summer and vacation and family stuff and whatever. It's really easy to stay up to speed with what we're doing. And it gives us a way to keep things fresh. We do Old Testament, and then do Old Testament history, and then we're going to spend some time in the Psalms. Right now we're doing the book of Acts. So we're looking at so much of the conflict in the opening eight chapters of the book of Acts, and now we're going to the Psalms. We're going to an Old Testament book. We're going to an entirely different genre of literature, because the Psalms are they're a collection of songs. They're kind of the original playlist for God's covenant people. And so there's a freshness to that. It's fun to change it up, so essentially what happens is over probably 10 to 12 or 13 years, we'll actually go through the entire Psalms as a church. And at that point, we'll probably just start over back at Psalm number 1. So anyways, that's been our MO. We do the Psalms. And one of the things that we've been stressing is again, the unique genre of literature. The Psalms are a collection of songs. They're standalone songs. And in these songs, we have the entire spectrum of spiritual and emotional health and experience for the people of God. Some of the songs are songs of celebration. Then you have psalms of repentance and lament. You have psalms of comfort. You have the imprecatory psalms, which I preached on last Sunday, which are calling out for God's judgment. So you have the entire bandwidth, the entire spectrum of emotions and experience of living as God's people in a broken and sinful world. They are absolutely just incredibly helpful and rich and wonderful and really fun and can be uniquely challenging to preach. So anyways, that's where we've been. That's what the Psalms are. But I want to talk about how we hear the Psalms. And this is something that I try to weave into the sermons. I'm not necessarily going there every week, but something that we need to be mindful. And that is we read the Psalms in two different ways. First of all, we're reading them as the songs of David. And of course, there are other authors that contribute to the Psalms, but many of these Psalms are written by King David. So when we're reading these experiences, when we're reading about what David is going through, we're getting an insight into his heart. We're getting an insight into his faith, into his emotional life, into his spiritual life, the highs and the lows and the ups and the downs and the wins and the tears and all of that. And we're hearing his voice sing these songs, okay? But we also know that anytime you're reading any sort of biblical literature, we believe in dual authorship, okay? And a lot of times people forget this. We believe that David wrote the majority of these Psalms. He identifies himself as the author, as do other authors in the Psalms, but he identifies himself as the author. And so we're reading this as something that he wrote, but we also believe that these are inspired by God. And so we need to ask ourselves when we're reading the Psalms, what does David want us to know? What does David mean by this? But we also need to step back and go, what does God mean by this? Because God is the ultimate author of the scriptures, right? So we got to keep in mind, David is speaking, but God is speaking. But I want to maybe give a unique take or angle on that notion. And this gets us back to Trent Reznor, Johnny Cash, and the Psalms, okay? Let me try and explain this a little bit. Trent Reznor was the front man for a band called 9 Inch Nails. 9 Inch Nails, if I'm thinking right, they came out in the early 90s as there was a massive wave of change sweeping through the music industry. I always like to say much of that is due to the eruption of the music scene in the Northwest and specifically in Seattle. But there were massive transitions happening. And one of the bands that came out of that was 9 Inch Nails. 9 Inch Nails was a very keyboard, electronic driven sound. And Trent Reznor, the front man, the creative genius behind 9 Inch Nails, at least in terms of his music and his performances and his videos presented this very dark, broken image. You hear it in the music, and you would see it in the images and the videos and the way that it was dressed. It was very, in a sense, it was lifeless because not only was the music so electronically computer keyboard driven, but there was this kind of just this industrial machine vibe to everything that they did. And it had to do with album art. It had to do with stage setup. It had to do with performances, everything. It was this kind of humanless vibe to it. And lots of people connected with that feel. Lots of people connected with the music. And so one of the songs that Trent Reznor wrote was Hurt. And it was one of those songs that connects in a unique and a profound way with your soul. One of the lines is, "I hurt myself today to see if I still feel." I think that was one of the first lines. And so many people heard that, like, oh my gosh, like I can connect, I can identify, I resonate with what you're saying. And so he wrote that song, and it was super popular I'm not never was a Nine Inch Nails fan, but that song I did like. I did appreciate, not so much because of the music and the arrangement, but it was more of a lyrical appreciation for that song. So Trent Reznor, he writes the song, records it, produces it, blah, 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 blah. Years go by, and then Johnny Cash covers the song. Johnny Cash did some albums in which he covered, other people's music, and just incredible music that Johnny Cash was doing. His covers of the songs were fantastic, but he did a cover of Hurt, and there was a video that accompanied it, and it's so interesting to watch his video versus the Nine Inch Nails video and the different vibes, the different things that they are communicating. But when Johnny Cash recorded Hurt, and he recorded it very much near the end of his life, and that song was released, that song took on an entirely different life, an entirely different feel and vibe. It had a power to it that it didn't, quite frankly, didn't possess when Trent Reznor, the author of the song, when he performed it. And so it kind of created some conflict, and people are like, man, Johnny Cash's rendition of Hurt is better than Trent Reznor's rendition of it. And so at some point, somebody actually interviewed Trent Reznor, was asking him about this, and like, hey, have you heard Johnny Cash's take on Hurt, the song that you wrote, and what do you think about it? And here's what, this is a paraphrase, this is essentially what Trent Reznor said. He said, that song was written to be sung by Johnny. All right, which was an incredibly humble thing for him to say and to do. But he essentially said that song, did he write that? Yeah, he wrote that. He arranged it, but he was like, that song was begging. That song existed. That song was written to be sung by Johnny Cash. And there's something very similar going on with the Psalms. When we read the Psalms, we are reading the lyrics. We are listening to the tracks of David's life, and he is bringing us into his experience with God, his experience with sin in the world, his experience with his own sin, his experience with the enemies that surrounded him. He's bringing us into all of that, and we hear it, and it has profound meaning and impact and influence in our lives. But there's something that happens when we hear Jesus sing the Psalms, right? These songs were written by David. Just like Hurt, they were written by David, but they were always meant to be sung by Jesus. And it's only when we hear Jesus singing those psalms that we see them for the richness, that we see the truth, we see the true beauty in this playlist. It's always there, it's always present, and yet when we hear Jesus sing the songs, when we hear him sing those words and those lyrics, they take on a whole new depth of meaning in our lives. Let me just quote one verse and show you how this works, okay? It's the very end of Psalm 34. It says, "The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned." All right, so when you hear David sing this song, what we're prone to think of is the conflict with David and King Saul. Saul sought to, out of jealousy and insecurity, he wanted to kill David. David was, as king, faced battles and wars, and God was faithful to him. We think of David going toe-to-toe with Goliath and defeating this great, beast of an enemy, the Philistine. Sorry, I got that wrong. The Philistine armies that were threatening God and his people, and we see that that God was with David, God protected David, God redeemed David's life. We see that in David, and it's so clear. And there's rich truth and beauty that we draw from that. And then none of those who take refuge in him will be condemned, that God has the final verdict. And that's beautiful and that's true. But what happens when we hear Jesus speak these words? What happens when we hear Jesus singing the song from the cross, before the cross, on the cross, and after the cross? What happens when we hear Jesus walking to Golgotha, to the hill of the skull, where he is going to suffer incredible, unimaginable physical pain, where he is going to endure the wrath of God on our behalf, and we hear him look at us and say, "The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned." You feel the weight to that? You see how it doesn't change the truth of the verse, but it brings a whole new depth to it. Or consider post-resurrection Jesus. So the disciples have seen what he has gone through. They are aware of the torture that he endured, the severe beating that was inflicted upon him before the crucifixion, and then the crucifixion itself, and the great pain and sorrow, and the apparent defeat and loss, and the burial of Christ, and the thought that God was done. God had abandoned his people. It was over. And then Christ comes back to life. He is resurrected. He receives a new body, a body that is immortal. And he looks at his disciples. He looks at us, and he says, "The Lord redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned." Do you see how that just brings a whole new depth to the truth of those words? Because David was protected in life in these battles that he went through, but we see that Jesus was protected in and through death. He actually tasted death, and he went to the grave, and he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And from that standpoint, Jesus now sings this song, "God redeems the life of his servants. None of those who take refuge in him will be condemned." It just is a beautiful thing to consider. And so as we read the Psalms, we need to think of the Psalms in the same way that we think of that song "Hurt," that these songs were written originally, many of them by King David, but man, they were all meant to be sung by the greater, truer King, Jesus. And when he sings these songs, when he sings these lyrics, there is a whole world, a new world of beautiful, rich, truth and meaning that is there in the Psalms for us to enjoy. So my encouragement and my challenge to you, I guess, going forward would be, hey, do yourself a favor and go listen to Nine Inch Nails' "Hurt." Okay, I'm not vouching for the rest of the music, but listen to that song. And maybe I haven't seen the video for years and years and years. I think it's I can't remember if it's appropriate or not. I think it is. Watch that video and then listen to Johnny Cash's version and watch that video and notice the difference. And then come to the Psalms. And as you read the Psalms and study through the Psalms, be very mindful that David wrote these songs and he sang these songs, and there is truth and beauty there, but we always need to also listen to the way that Jesus sings the songs. Listen for his voice and ask yourself, how does the truth present in this psalm, how does it go deeper? How is it more profound and beautiful when I hear Jesus sing this psalm? It turns out Trent Reznor and Johnny Cash can teach us an awful lot about how to read the Psalms. All right, that's it for today in this episode of The Blitz. Until next time, take care.